Welcome to the Alignment Show, featuring Welcome to the Alignment Show, featuring conversations with folks who have taken steps to identify their highest values and align their lives around them. Time on this earth is not unlimited, and you may be seeking to make sure you spend your time on things that matter to you. These conversations will encourage you and support you in doing so. Now, let's meet this week's guest on the Alignment Show. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the universe. Welcome once again to the Alignment Show. I guess if you're on some other planet, it's still got to be morning or afternoon or whatever. Yeah. But we're glad to have you with us here on the Alignment Show. We are having a special episode of sorts today. It happens that in this country and in others, May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and so we have a guest today that we actually made this recording back in January. I'm going to have to catch up a little bit as far as what we talked about, but I know we wanted to schedule it for today or this month because of this tie-in. Suzanne Jabour has worked with mental health in a lot of ways for a number of years. And so we thought this would be a perfect time for it. So I will introduce Suzanne to you in a bit. As we're getting started here, though, just a little reminder of some of our sponsors, the folks who make it possible for us to keep doing this show. One of those folks is SalesWise Live. I've got a crawl going for those of you who are on video to make it easy for you to find them. And for those who are listening, audio only, it's DonnKing.com. That's DONNKING.com/saleswise. We talk about them just about every show because I just believe in their approach to things. All of us are in sales in some fashion. You may not think of yourselves as being in sales, and especially if you think of sales as being manipulation or pressuring people or whatever. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that people need what you bring to the world. And in order to get that to them, you have to connect with them. You have to build trust. You have to build a relationship. And so whether you are in commission sales or salaried sales, nonprofit, pastoral work, education, then you are in a position to persuade people. Not to manipulate them, not to fool them, but to establish that trust so that they can benefit from what you have to offer. And that's where SalesWise Live comes in. These folks are experts in helping you to ethically develop those kind of relationships. Check them out. They have regular events for that sort of training. DonnKing.com/saleswise. And then our other regular sponsor is, in a sense, me, but really it's about my books, the books that I continue to write. DonnKing.com/books. You will find the ones that are already published. The Sparklight Chronicles is my current main series, I would say, business parables that are designed to help you to live your values and value your life. That's what the Alignment Show is all about. There are 2 more books coming in that series, but before those get published, there is a nonfiction book that is going to be out there within about 6 weeks, actually. Those of you on with this video, I've got the cover up on the screen with me, Creating While Caring. The subtitle is Practical Tips to Keep Creating While Caring for a Loved One. This is not a book that is for folks who are caregivers who now want to start writing. That's perfectly legitimate. That's just not what this book is for. This is for people who are writers, sculptors, photographers, actors, musicians, creative careers who now find themselves in the caregiver role. That's where I've been for the last 22 years. And so this book is about how to keep going with that while taking care of your responsibilities. If you're not in that position, you probably know someone who is. There are in the United States alone 53 million unpaid caregivers, and many of them have been in those kinds of professions or related professions that you may not think of as being creative, and yet they are. Like real estate sales, for example. You're a problem solver. That is a creative profession. So that will be coming out within about 6 weeks, and we will have links for those. You will always be able to find whatever is out there from me as a writer by going to donking.com/books. Now, with that, always remember confidencecultivators.com. That's where you can get the show notes for all of our guests, including our current one. And so let me tell you just a little bit about Suzanne Jabour. She has been through a journey. Suzanne is a grieving mom who has found meaning in her loss through providing grief education, sharing how grief really works and how we can support people experiencing it. She works with organizations and businesses to build the skills and protocols to better support people who are grieving at work. Now, she's available as a speaker and a trainer, um, certified grief educator, transformational coach, and workshop leader. Somebody that I relate to on a couple of levels, as you'll hear in our conversation. And so, without taking any more time away from the interview, let's go ahead and bring up Suzanne Jabour. So, recorded, Donn, take it away. And thank you for that introduction, Donn. We are glad to be talking with Suzanne Jabour today. We talked about the pronunciation of her name beforehand. I have one of those names. Suzanne, I didn't even think to tell you this. My full first name is spelled Donnell. And I didn't get called Donnell until I came to East Tennessee, Rosie O'Donnell.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, I like to honor people's pronunciation. But the most important thing is that we want to talk with you today about your experience. So welcome to the Alignment Show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just love the concept of this show because I'm absolutely with you. Something happened to us and we all had time to slow down and really think about what we were doing with our time and our relationships. And, to me, that was the cause of the Great Resignation, that you're reframing in a beautiful way. And so, yeah, I'm just so excited to talk to you today.
Absolutely. In fact, I've just realized I don't even know how long you've been doing what you're doing. I know a little bit about your background. And so, folks, those of you listening, watching, Suzanne's experience fits perfectly in what we do here in the Alignment Show because she went through a difficult experience. And you know that I usually ask people how they got started. Well, I suspect that part of what Suzanne talks about a lot of times, as she is a professional speaker and all that sort of thing, she talks about how she got started. And I told her in my email, I regret the circumstances that have led her to do what she does, but I very much applaud her decision to use that to help other people. So, Suzanne, let me just get out of the way and let you tell us what happened that brought you to be a grief counselor, if I'm saying that correctly.
Yeah, I'm very careful about that counseling word because in Canada, anyway, that requires a specific educational designation and training. So I'm a grief educator. I do have that certification and training. I have coaching training, and I'm speaking all the time everywhere. And really came, I think, as almost everyone in the grief space does, to this place of sharing my story, what I'm learning, what I know to be true, and really the ability grief has and the opportunity it presents us to create connection and transformation. And all of that I learned out of the biggest devastation of my life, which was the death of my son, Ben, in September of 2020. And it's so interesting to me that that has kind of put me on this path. Right before Ben died, I had just finished my coaching training. I had my programs all ready to launch about a completely different, with a completely different focus. And I really found, even though I had grieved before, I didn't know enough about it to do it in a way that felt healthy and to do it in a way that felt survivable even. There's something about the out of order death of a child that really is grief at a different level than I had experienced before, even though I had already been through the, quite early in my life. I was in my mid 30s when my father died and my mid 40s when my mom died. So it wasn't the first time that I'd had a significant loss like that. And I was completely ill-equipped to cope
Mm.
with what was happening to me.
Yeah.
And
So
what
I have to ask real quick, how
Oh,
old
yeah.
was Ben?
Ben was 22. Ben is forever 22.
Okay.
Um, and what's so interesting is I really started writing about what I was experiencing as a self-preservation tool, right? As so many people do. And I think probably most people just choose to journal and they have this private conversation with themselves. And for whatever reason, I was sharing it on Facebook, as you do, right? If you think about back to that time, September of 2020, we'd had a little bit of opening of restrictions over the summer. More restrictions were coming, especially in northern climes where we were all going to be inside together for the winter. And so many of us were sort of sharing what was happening for us. We were all sharing sourdough recipes, right? And what we were watching and all the things. And I was sharing my grief journey. And the response that I got from people was so universally supportive, which is lovely. But the most meaningful thing was that I was hearing from people that no one had talked to them about grief like that.
Mm.
And no one had shared the symptoms they were having, for example. There's some very normal physiological things that happen to us and physical symptoms we have when we're in deep grief. And no one had shared any of that with them. So either they hadn't understood what was happening to them when they were grieving, or they had watched a loved one grieve and not realized that what was happening was, both normal and real and not confusing, and that nothing about them was broken.
Mm.
And
Mm.
that response really is what set me down this path of really wanting to share and break that taboo and stigma, because all we're surrounded by when it comes to grief is ignorance. We just don't know. And when we don't know, we feel scared. And
Mhm.
when we feel scared, we can't act. And it's very hard to be scared and compassionate. And what we desperately need is for people to be compassionate. So that really became my driver, and my, big sky goal mission is really to change that paradigm of silence, of fear, of bumbling through hurtful things unintentionally to, what if we have some curiosity? What if we're
Mhm.
asking really thoughtful questions? What if we're talking about this and responding to this in an entirely different way? And then how does that give grievers permission to grieve in a way that's more healthy? So
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
really has become the frame of everything that I do and am about.
Okay, now that makes a lot of sense. A number of questions come to mind. A quick
Mhm,
one. I'm not sure if we've said clearly, maybe we have, maybe we haven't, that you're in Canada.
mhm.
The Canadian experience during the pandemic, I have to assume, was similar to what went on in this country with lockdowns and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
Um,
it was very similar. Different, sort of, different but similar. Yeah, similar
yeah,
lockdowns and mandates, and yeah,
and all that political stuff around it.
yeah. That was
Regardless of
that
that,
part was different, but yeah.
yeah. Okay, so there's that. There's also longtime listeners to the show. I've told this story before, but you and I haven't talked about it. I used to, when I was um, pastoring in a different church years ago. I had somebody who came into my office, and he was one of those people that was always a jolly fellow, laughing all the time.
Mhm.
He was in my office because people will use pastors as, a cheap therapist. We don't charge
Yep.
$120 an hour. And it was the anniversary of the day that he and his wife and pregnant wife and little girl came around the mountain here in East Tennessee and ran head on into a truck full of beans. And his wife died in his arms.
Mhm.
And of course, they lost the baby. And he was having a hard time, and I didn't know this. I didn't know that background of his. And he left, and somebody else came in, and they had a story, and somebody else came in, long story short, I realized that everybody at some point has some experience that makes you ask, how is it you're not curled up in a fetal position on the floor?
Yep.
But we don't talk about those things. And so we think we're alone, which makes it worse.
Mhm.
But it's a pretty universal experience. And so as we're talking about grief, loss can involve a lot of different things.
Mhm.
Are you finding, as you posted your experience on social media, and people almost were given permission to say, yes, it's not identical, everybody's
Yep.
experience is unique, but because you're talking about it, now it's okay for me to talk about it. Is that a big part of what you're doing, is just giving people permission to simply be human?
Absolutely. And that's what we need to do as a collective, right? Grief is universal, and we grieve every loss. So it's not just the loss of loved ones. What's interesting for me is it actually, in a weird way, in my personal life, so in my professional life, or when I'm speaking or working with clients or giving a workshop, absolutely that's what happens. In my personal life, weirdly, because I had kind of reached the summit of that weird hierarchy of losses that are worthy of grieving in our kind of mixed up relationship with grief, it actually, in my personal sphere, held people back from talking to me about it, because they would say things like, oh, but your loss is so much worse than mine. Like, I don't want to bother you with
Yeah,
mine because yours is so much worse. And the problem with that is, I mean, multifold. There's massive problems with that. I'm just realizing there's a big glare. There we go. Move my camera a little bit and get the glare out. The problem with that is that we need to all be talking about all the losses. And there's no winning. Like, I can tell you from the top of that hierarchy, I didn't win
yes.
anything. It didn't help any, except that it gave me permission. Because there's something in our collective that understands that the death of a child is awful and devastating and all the things. So it gave me some permission to be able to grieve publicly and loudly, which I made that choice for myself, regardless of permission. It didn't matter. That was how I was going to survive. But it really, interestingly, with people who knew me and knew Ben, kind of shut those conversations down. So it had, publicly, in my public and professional life, yes, absolutely gives people permission to say, oh my gosh, that happened to me too, or I experienced this different kind of loss, but I had that same symptom, or whatever we're talking about. And there is no win for anybody with that hierarchy. We need to just break that down, because yes, the loss of a job, different than the loss of my child. The loss of an opportunity, different than the loss of my child. The loss of a pet, the loss of whatever it is. They're all different from each other. But our judgment of whether that loss is worthy of grief is where we get stuck and stopped. And to me, the cost of that is that as a collective, we need new skills around grief. We need new skills about how we talk to people. We need new skills about how we offer support. We need new understanding of how it really works. And when we have new skills, we need to practice them to get good at them. And where we can practice is those less catastrophic losses. Because me, as I was a grieving mother, grieving out loud in acute grief, I am a terrifying first assignment. You can't start there.
Yeah.
Right? We don't get our driver's license and go drive across the country, I hope. We drive to the corner store. And then as we get better and we get more confident and our skills build, then we take on the big, tough stuff. But in grief, we're so scared of it and so avoidant that we're missing the opportunity to practice, which is really what we need, because those big ruptures are going to happen, right? And they impact us for a long, long time. So they're present and they're in, our sphere and our energy and all, for a long, long time. And we need support and we need connection. And we're missing the opportunity to learn the skills that would allow us to do that better.
Indeed. It makes me, I want to ask at this point, I'm realizing that you had the training as a coach prior to this happening. And so it was like, okay, I had it's like a carpenter learning to use a hammer effectively. And then later on decides, am I going to build furniture or am I going to build a house Okay.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
question that comes to mind right now is, you experienced this loss. At what point did it occur to you that you could use your training to help yourself? And by the way, folks, I'm pretty sure about this, since I'm outside, as usual, I'm outside of my range of expertise. But the point
Yeah.
here is not to stop feeling the pain. This is about effectively processing it. And so, at what point did it occur to
Yeah.
you that, this thing that I have learned that I could help other people with in their, I don't know what you were thinking of before, career coaching or whatever, I can use it for this, for myself. You got to do that before you could use it for other people.
Yeah, 100%. And I was so grateful and remain so grateful that the coaching that I'm trained in and the modality that I use with my clients now is around transformation. So it's not necessarily your sort of typical, career coaching, or, there's a lot of coaching that's very process driven and very goal oriented. And the coaching that I'm trained in and that I use is transformationally based. So it's about looking at how you show up in the world and really being self-responsible and really feeling our connectedness to each other, to ourselves, to, the universe as a whole. And so because that was already my foundation, I saw very clearly two things. I knew that the person who existed before I received that phone call no longer existed. I knew that version of me, September 2026's Suzanne, no longer existed. And so I had to figure out who I wanted to be next, which of course is what this transformational process is, is a foundation of the training I had. And I also knew that I was going to be forever changed, and I could either let that happen without my input, or I could be very intentional. And I wanted to be very intentional. I knew that story of the parent who loses a child who, as you say, is curled up in the fetal position on the couch, sobbing for forever. I knew I didn't want that to be my story. And that seems to be kind of the only one. It's not true, as most of those stories we're taught aren't true, but it seems to be kind of the only one that exists for a grieving parent. And I was very clear that was not going to be my story. So having that foundation in, the growth mindset and really looking at things with curiosity absolutely shaped how I chose to grieve, and didn't, as you say, it didn't lessen the pain. The pain is unfathomable and inexplicable to anyone who hasn't had it. And I had to feel it all. I had to allow all of those emotions, as painful as they were. And I spent plenty of moments and hours and days curled up in the fetal position on the couch sobbing. None of that was different. And I knew that if I allowed it all, there was a path there. That letting it all be acceptable was the way for me.
Yeah, key idea there with the word acceptable. And I want to dig into the curiosity thing there too, because curiosity is one of my 3 big values. And I've always found it to be a useful tool for dealing with whatever was going on. I'll also say, and I can't remember if we've had this conversation or not, I relate in a way to the experience. My oldest son passed away 7 years ago this month. And so I recognize what, as you were saying, people have, first of all, they'll say, okay, well, my challenge does not compare to yours. And so as I've seen, people's challenges are people's challenges. I also use humor as a coping mechanism. And so, our family motto is, if you can't be a good example, at least be a horrible warning. And so,
right. Oh my gosh, that's genius. I love it.
And so that's, if I say something like that, it seems to give people permission to go ahead and talk about their own thing. But having said that, the curiosity thing, I wonder if part of how that works, and I guess this is my personal experience here, part of how that works is if I can get curious about my experience, it gives me some mental step back. Not that it takes the emotion out of it, but as happens in, let's see, was it neuro-linguistic programming? I know one of their tools, and this may be something that you harness. One of their tools goes from "What am I going to do?" to "I wonder what Donn is going to do." Does curiosity kind of work that same way? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it 100% does. And for me, it was really just this download that I had. And I knew my path was to be conscious, which is that emotions piece we talked about, and allowing it all to be okay, even when it was horrifying, all acceptable. All of you are welcome, even though I hate everything about this, right? And curious. So conscious and curious was going to be the way. And I just was so clear that that was the path. And it's interesting that you say that, because it does really, I think curiosity creates two things. Neurologically, it's actually really good for us. Like even just the sound of is really great for our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the one that desperately needs calming when we're in overwhelming grief and panic and, you know, all the things. And it does allow us to kind of step back and look at things almost like a movie. Like, I'm really curious about what might be next. For me, really, the earliest curiosity was about that moment we're talking about where you're curled up in a ball and you're sobbing so hard you can't breathe. And I remember thinking, I am sobbing so hard I can't breathe. And how do I oxygenate my body when that is happening? That was the first piece of curiosity that I can remember, was like, how do I get enough oxygen when I can't slow my system enough to do anything but gasp? And then it became about, you know, how do I really help people understand this better? How do I share what's happening to me, you know, from a different place of, you know, getting the spin out of my head, which is how I started sharing, to really intentionally thinking, like, what do people need to know? They need to know how it feels to have that person's birthday. They need to know how it feels to have my birthday. They need to know how grief works on vacation. Like, they need to know so much, because really we don't know very anything. So that curiosity really is what's led me down this path of, you know, what is possible if I'm not going to be that story of a grieving parent where their life is over and they're devastated forever and they never do anything else, which is just all false and silly. Then what else? Like, if not that, then what? And the curiosity, really, if you're a griever listening to this and thinking, I can't even understand what you're talking about because my pain is so intense, the curiosity can simply be about, how am I going to move my body a little bit today? How am I going to feed myself something a little bit more healthy? How am I going to get out of bed and go to the couch? I mean, we had days when I look back at those step counts from those early days, they were in the hundreds. Because it literally was, I could get from the couch to the bed, or from the bed to the couch. And then I remember days my daughter and I would look at each other at like 5 in the afternoon, 6 in the evening, and be like, is it socially acceptable to go back to bed? Like, can we just go back? Like, we're done with today. We cannot take any more of today. We're just going to go back to bed.
Yeah.
And, you know, yes, who cares if it's socially acceptable? Nobody's watching. We don't need to tell anybody. Yeah. But it was that curiosity about, like, how do I take a little baby step? Because it's all baby steps. You can baby step your way from anywhere to anywhere else. There is no big steps. We're not striding confidently. We are taking tenuous baby steps, and that's okay. Be curious about where the next one is. What foot am I on? Like, what do I need to get done today? What absolutely has to get done today? Do that. How do I take care of myself? And I remember seeing those lists. People would send them to me being helpful, of, you know, the 10 things you should do when you're grieving. And I would look at those in those early days, Donn, and just think, I don't know who these people are talking to, but like, get up and meditate and go do some yoga and hug a tree and take a walk and do volunteer work and drink some water. I'm like, I don't know I am happy I made it to the couch. Like, I don't know who you're talking to, but
this may be a good place to throw in. And by the way, we're getting the glare again, so I know the sun's moving.
Yeah, I'm just moving the camera. Yep. The sun is moving in the sky, weirdly.
Yeah.
The planet is.
If at some point you want to tell us about, because I know telling your own story very often is a big part of managing grief. So, you know, tell us how the loss happened and all that sort of thing. But maybe within the context of that, I'm found in my own situation, people would not know what to say, and therefore they wouldn't say anything. It was more important to have the connection than to hear the right words. Having said that, there are some common things that people will say that are absolutely the wrong thing to say. Like our kids
Yeah.
are older, so we didn't hear the thing that I know people who have losses of young children will hear, which is you can have more. Well, what
Yeah, you could
difference
have
does
another
that
one, but
make?
they're
Yeah.
replaceable.
So there are wrong things to say, but we don't want to make people
Yeah.
so nervous about saying the wrong thing that they say nothing. And so, if you want to
Yeah.
tell us the story, great, but I certainly want to hear, what do we avoid saying to people in grief? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to tackle the last question first. I'm happy to share my story, and my story as Ben's mom. What we need to not say is every single thing you've heard people say for years. It's that simple. Every cliche and platitude, if you think about them when you're not in that moment, they all have a subtext that basically says, I am not a safe place for you to grieve.
Mm.
You can have another one. The subtext, get over it. It's not
Yeah.
that big of a deal. They would want you to be happy. The subtext, I want you to be happy because you are making me uncomfortable. I am not a safe place for you to grieve. All of them have that same subtext. And what we're wanting mostly as people who are saying something awkward, human, as messy as we are, we're wanting to offer that safe space. We're wanting to really let the person feel understood and seen and valued. But when we say those kinds of things, it closes the conversation. What we need to say instead, and I wish I would be a bajillionaire if I could find the one perfect thing. There isn't one. So I'm here to tell you it's the right way. It comes from where you're saying it from. And when we're scared, when we're in that fear I was talking about before, we're all up in our head. We're trying to fix it. We're trying to do something. We want to take action. We're spinning in our head. Where we need to speak from is our heart. Because if we are speaking genuinely from the heart, saying something compassionate and caring, it's very difficult to do harm from there. Because what we would say is something like, Donn, I'm so grateful that you shared with me about the loss of your beautiful, amazing son. And I'm so sorry that happened to you. I know that I wouldn't wish that on any other parent because I have been there. And I think what you're doing is amazing. And he would be so proud of you.
Yeah.
Right? You hear, and I don't know anything about the story. I don't know anything about him. I don't know about what happened. But I know that I care and that it matters and that what you're doing on some level is inspired by that loss.
Yes.
And the way you perceive the world is inspired by that loss. I know that for sure.
Mm.
Can you hear how that's so much different than, oh, I'm so sorry?
Oh, yes, absolutely. It occurs to me that the word compassion literally means to feel with or to suffer with. And
Yeah. And what I say about compassion, if you look at the Compassion Project and things like that that are so exciting and interesting, it's empathy in action. So I'm putting myself in your shoes, trying to imagine what those emotions might be like, which is not hard for me to imagine. Been there.
Yeah.
There, I'm there doing that. It's not a been there, done that. It's a there doing that.
Yes.
And then we want to take action. We want to say something that shows that we're a person who can listen. We want to do something that provides real support. And that doing part is all about specificity. So we actually have it backwards. We tend to say something super closed off, one of those cliches or platitudes that just shut down the conversation. And we tend to offer, anything you need, let me know. Well, the grieving brain can do absolutely nothing with that. That is not helpful. I know you mean well, and I would just listen to the energy and think, oh, this person loves me. They want to help me, and I cannot do anything with that. Mm-hmm. What we need is specific offers. Like, it has to be a yes, no question. So you're going to say open-hearted, genuine, vulnerable, messy. If you don't know what to say, start there. I don't know what to say. And what I want you to know is I care about you deeply. And I'm going to figure out how I can support you the best way possible for as long as you need.
You
Do you
make
know
a
that's totally different than anything? I'm so sorry. Anything you need, let me know. Like, it's energetically and emotionally so different.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I can't think of anything that would be helpful, quite honestly. There's
No.
nothing I can think of.
And that's our grieving brain can't. So we
Yeah.
need the supporters to do the brain work. They need to
Hmm.
provide the brain power and come to us with, I'm going to the grocery store. Go stand in front of your fridge and tell me what's missing, and I'll bring it this afternoon. Not,
And
do you need anything? Too broad. I don't know.
yeah,
I'm not.
exactly. Let me ask a focusing question here. If somebody understands the wisdom of this and that I need to be specific, the person who's
Mhm.
grieving, can't think. Um, which approach is better to say, using your example, go stand in front of your refrigerator and tell me what you need from the grocery store? Or to say something like, would it be helpful if I brought you some groceries? In other
Yeah.
words, given, which would be the better approach?
The one that
Does the
you feel the
question make
most comfortable saying and that you're prepared to do is the better approach.
sense? Okay. Okay.
And it's
Because,
going to depend on your relationship with the person, right? Some people you could say, hey, like a really close friend or family member, you could say, hey, I'm going to the grocery store. Tell me what you need. Otherwise, I'm going to bring you stuff you don't want. Right? Because people bring you stuff you don't want. I've never thrown away so much food in my entire life than I did in those
yeah,
first years. Because people just
correct.
bring you stuff and I'm like, I don't eat this. I don't want this. I can barely eat anything. Anyway, like, and I know they were trying to help, but it didn't help.
Mhm.
And other
Yeah.
people, you're going to say, would it be helpful if I brought you some groceries or if I came and stripped the beds and did the laundry?
Hmm. Hmm. Offer something specific. Yeah,
Right? But
absolutely.
that level of specificity, and offer something you like to do. Don't there's no need to martyr yourself. Offer something you like to do because you're more likely to follow through. And we need you to follow through because when you say you're going to do something, weirdly, we can remember that. For me, I experienced that anyway, and I'm interested if you do too. But when people would say, okay, I will take that task on, that task left my brain permanently, it felt like.
Mm.
And if they didn't do it, then days later, I'd be like, how did that not get done? Like, because I had just completely erased it from the processes, right?
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
what's happening to our brain in grief is so fascinating. And, other people are far more equipped to talk about it than I am. It's
Mm.
important for people to know, though, that our brain is very busy literally reprogramming itself.
Hmm.
And it's normal for it to feel like it's all of a sudden made of mashed potatoes.
So, how much of your coaching involves telling folks who are grieving how to deal with other people? Here's the
Hmm.
incident that I have in
Oh, that's such a
mind
good
here.
question. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
the just a specific experience. One of my dear friends, at the time, people were doing, as we've just been talking about, bringing food over. We wound up
Yep.
with tons of food,
Yeah.
and honestly, at the time, we were able to do a lot of cooking on our own, and cooking was a way of giving my brain something to do.
Mm.
So, I'd be telling people, I said, I appreciate the offer, but we don't really need the food. We've got too much as it is. And she pulled me aside and she said, let people bring you food. Food is love. And I thought that little phrase, was interesting. And she wasn't fussing at me or whatever, but it was people wanted to help. They didn't know what to say. They didn't know what to do. And
Yeah.
here in the South,
Food is
we
love.
take food,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden, okay, that makes sense to me. And so what we did was to let people bring food over, and then we didn't just throw it out. We would take it to somebody else who needed food. We
Right.
made sure it got used,
Yeah.
but that in a way, we were turning people away who wanted to
Mm.
connect with us.
Mhm.
So now I'm not asking so much about that specific thing as that I needed somebody to help me learn how to deal with other people
Yeah.
when I was grieving.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We do spend a fair bit of energy on sort of two aspects of that. One is sort of the reintegration,
Mhm.
which is really hard for a lot of us. And I found it really hard. What's fascinating about people that once you've seen it, you can't unsee is that we spend a lot of time complaining.
Yeah.
We spend a lot of time complaining. And when my world is literally a post apocalyptic nightmare and has completely fallen apart, you complaining about the price of gas makes me want to punch you in the throat. It just does.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think for many, many grievers who've had really, catastrophic ruptures, it's really hard to listen to people complaining about stuff that feels so meaningless and like pointless to complain about.
Mhm.
So I do end up spending time with folks talking about that for sure, and that integration piece and how to, have what is a sort of quote unquote normal conversation in this very abnormal circumstance. And, finding ways, yes, to let people help you, but that are truly helpful. So for me, I would not have been able to take on, I'm going to find someone else that I can get this food to. And like, that was not possible.
Mhm.
So people brought food and we ate what we could. And I finally had to say to my daughter, you know what? I can't feel guilty. I hate throwing away food. Like she will tell you, I will
Well,
make
yeah,
the most disgusting, what we call crisper drawer juices, because it's like, well, these vegetables are about to go. They better go through the juicer. And it's just like, it tastes healthy, but it's not delicious. Like I
yeah.
hate throwing away food.
Mhm.
But I finally said to her, you know what? I, I can't. There's nothing else. I don't even know what to do with it. I don't even know. I froze weird random things, and oh, it was just silly. And yes, we need to help people find ways to support us that really are supportive.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
that's why, I love speaking to organizations and communities about how we could support each other better so that we don't end up with a bunch of food that then you're now having to do emotional, labor, physical labor to try and find a good home for this food that people brought because they love you. Great. But was
Yeah.
there a more helpful way that they could have shown their love for you than making work for you to do to make sure this food found a good home?
Yeah,
100%.
what do I do with this stuff? It reminds me, I'm sure, you probably remember George Carlin.
Mhm.
Um, one of the things I remember him saying, it's just human nature. You go to the refrigerator, you pull something out, you say, "Is this still good?" And
Yeah,
nobody knows. So what do you do with it? You put it back in the refrigerator.
that's right.
You're not going to eat it, but you put it back in there until you're sure it's
Yeah,
not good anymore. So yeah,
that's
that can
right.
put us in that position.
Yeah.
Oh my. Well, we are starting to run out of time. Do you want to go ahead and tell your story a little bit more?
Yeah, I can for sure. I lived that experience that every parent dreads and went to bed one night. I was away with my daughter, and Ben had decided not to come with us. And, received that middle of the night phone call that if we allow ourselves to imagine, we imagine. And I can tell you it's exactly as horrifying and devastating as you might imagine. And Ben had died of what I choose to call a terminal case of depression and anxiety.
Mm,
Because what bothers me about how we label things for folks that have poor mental wellness is that we describe their death by the means and not by the disease. So one of the things that I'm here to disrupt in a different episode is, the way that we talk about mental illness and the way that we still have so many stigmas and barriers around people, even when their illness turns out to be terminal, we talk about it in a different way than we would if he had died of cancer or he had died of, whatever else. So, yeah, that's what happened to us. It, happened to him. It is devastating as a parent to lose a child anyway. Um, and to lose a child to mental illness, I think, is especially difficult. And addiction, I think, has the same kind of stigmas around it and the worry that, the shoulda, coulda, woulda is
mhm,
strong. And for me, I feel really fortunate in that I know that we did everything we could for him. And
mm,
I know that he knew he was loved. And I know he knew that we knew that he loved us. So love was never a worry, and caring about him and doing everything we could to support him in his illness and try and find a solution. I know we did everything.
mm, mm.
And
Yeah.
what was interesting to me in my earliest grief is I got a glimpse at what depression and anxiety might feel like. And what I knew because it was grief is that it was temporary and that it would change over time and over, different experiences. And I could so easily imagine that if your brain was wired to think that was permanent, that would be almost impossible to live with.
Mm-hmm. I have to imagine that on top of what we might think of as normal grief, you may have had to deal with, what would we say, a certain kind of judgment from other
Mm.
people. And so, did that add to the grief? Did it take a different way of processing, or did that just not happen?
Yeah, it's interesting. For me, it didn't happen.
Good,
And I
good.
don't know if it's because I chose to not be judgmental of myself
Mm,
or to, like, I don't feel guilt. I very clearly saw that fork in the road where the
hmm
shoulda, coulda, woulda, path was right there and I could choose it. And I just thought, there's no peace there.
Yes.
There's no win there for me. There's nothing there that allows me to honor Ben or rebuild an amazing, wonderful life that is what I wished for him and what he would wish for us. And I remember seeing it and thinking, yeah, I don't feel that. And it wasn't that I felt like I should, because I was very careful to not should on myself.
hmm
It was that I really knew that I had done everything and he had done everything. We had tried all the things. We had done all the things. And who was I to judge?
Yeah, yeah.
Either myself or him.
So let me probe from my own perspective a little bit. Um, and again, longtime listeners have heard the story before. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but our oldest son was severe diabetic, brittle diabetic,
Mm.
and also on in renal failure. And what ultimately killed him was the flu, because it threw his blood chemistry off,
Mm-hmm.
along with the renal failure and all that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So he was in the hospital at the time, and the nurses were talking with him at 5 a.m. He was sitting up and having a conversation, and when they went in at 5:20 a.m., he was gone. And
Wow.
so, where I have wrestled with logically knowing there's nothing I could do, and yet there's still that thing in the background about, what could I've done differently? We
Mm-hmm.
had the flu ourselves at the time, so I wasn't very responsive. It was
Right.
the only time he was in the hospital that we didn't go to see him in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
Parts of me are going, I should have ridden the nurses a little more, even though he was well an adult.
Yeah.
You know, I should have been checked. So, I understand the psychology, the logic, the self help of not shooting on yourself, which I've
Yeah.
always loved that phrase.
Yep.
And it doesn't keep me up at night. It's in my case, it's more like you can't keep the thought from crossing your mind. You just don't give
Mm.
it a home.
Yeah.
Okay. So almost inevitably there will be people who don't have the training that you do, the self awareness,
Mm-hmm.
who will be saying, what could I have done differently? I don't know that it's guilt. It's like, okay, I don't have a
Yeah.
TARDIS. I can't go back in time and change anything. What's the use in even doing this?
Yeah.
And yet people do it. How do you help them let go?
So in my grief educator training, actually with David Kessler, he has a wonderful phrase, which I've heard from other people as well, but that's the first place I heard it. And he says, you didn't cause it, you couldn't control it, and they couldn't cure it.
Mm,
And for me, that was a real, like, that just landed so clearly for me, that as being like, that's like the trifecta. I didn't cause it, I couldn't control it, and they couldn't cure it.
mm.
And sometimes it's just that devastating and that simple.
Yes, yes, indeed. Well, before I forget, this is kind of a change in subject, but we do have a lot of audio only listeners, the folks who have been with us on video. They've been seeing the crawl with the websites, and we're going to show the QR code here in just a second for the
Mhm.
convenience of those folks that use it. But we also want to be sure and say out loud about how to connect with you. So first of all, let's go ahead and put the QR code up there for folks who are on with us in video. You can use your camera, and this will take you right to Suzanne's website. For those of you who prefer the more what would we say, traditional way of doing things, typing it in yourself. We've also got on the crawl, it is SuzanneJabour.com. Now let's spell that out for the audio listeners. That's SuzanneJabour.com. SuzanneJabour.com. And because it may be a little easier for people to parse out loud, I'm going to say your older website that still points to this one is alivedexperience.com. I'll bet you can spell that, listeners. You know, alivedexperience.com, but it'll take you to this same website. So I would encourage
all things point there.
Absolutely. I would encourage you to check that out. And then if you have any trouble with it, we always have the, get that QR code off of there. As my friend David Newman says, it's like running a starship. Okay.
Right. You're doing great.
Yeah. You can always find show notes for all of our episodes by going to confidencecultivators.com. And I'm not sure what episode number this will be, but you'll be able to find it, in the listing without a problem and get to the resources that we're talking about. So, Suzanne, as we are drawing our time together to a close, as you know, I like to ask, there's probably something that you wish I had asked about. And I'll add this thing when I looked at what Suzanne could talk about. There's 9 different topics there, folks. I mean, she's got a lot of wisdom to share. Okay. So if there's something that you wish I had asked about and I didn't, what would that be? And what would you tell us?
I think the only thing that we really didn't talk about at all is the timeline. And what I would say to people is, if you think that grief is supposed to be days, it's months. If you think it's supposed to be months, it's years. It really is a forever experience. And, that acute grief is the first days and weeks. Early grief is the first 2 years. Then we start to move into mature grief, which really is the forever kind. And that's important for us to understand as grievers, because what's happening to us is normal. They're just not telling us that. And for supporters, it's important to understand that we can use your support. We can use your listening ear, your ability to go get us groceries or, take out the garbage cans, whatever it is, for a really long time. And especially around special days, the holiday season, the anniversary of their death, their birthday, Mother's Day or Father's Day, if that's the relationship, those are going to be griefier times. And for you to reach out during those times is super powerful. And supporters tell me, they say all the time, well, I don't want to remind them and I don't want to make them sad. You are not reminding them. It is impossible for you to remind me that Ben died, because I know it every moment of every day. Knowing that you also remember and that you thought something funny about him, or you saw something you would have told him, or you're thinking of us at this particularly hard time of year, that is so powerful, because otherwise the griever's left feeling alone. And I know that's not what any of the supporters want.
Exactly. Very, very wise. It makes me think of a woman. I pastor a church now, and I've got a 93-year-old woman whose daughter died 27 years ago, and she is certainly still grieving.
Absolutely.
There's an odd sort of connection there too. This year, for the first time, on the day of the anniversary of Barry's death, it didn't occur to me that this was the day. This was the first year that I didn't go on Facebook, because we've kept his Facebook going as a memorial, and I didn't go on there and say once again how much I miss you.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel guilty, but at the same time I thought, I missed the day. And I know Barry doesn't care.
Yeah.
But it said something to me about the processing of it, and I agree 100%. You're not going to remind me. It's always there. I wrote an article a couple of years after his passing. The title of it was, "When You Don't Know What to Say, It's Important to Say It Anyway."
Yeah.
And so I appreciate so much you coming on here. And I'm going to tell you right now, I would like to bring you on another time just to talk about the mental health aspect that you
Mhm.
referenced a while ago. There's at least 8 other topics here, Suzanne. So
Well, we'll get back together and cover some of them off.
sounds good. Sounds good. In any case, folks, I will turn this back over to my virtual self for the outro. But once again, Suzanne, thank you for being here with us on the Alignment Show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And I guess I'm not really the virtual self now. You know, it's the live self. I don't know. Always wrestle with that. In any case, I just appreciate so much Suzanne coming on. As I said earlier, and we recorded this back in January, and so I was remembering a lot of what we were talking about there. And there's a metaphor that I have seen. I wish I could give proper credit for it, but I'm doing this off the top of my head about how grief, when it happens, it's like a bouncing ball inside of a box, and when it's fresh, it's a small box, and so the ball is hitting the sides frequently. And as time goes on, the box gets bigger, but the ball is still bouncing, and so every once in a while that ball's going to hit the side, and when it does, you're going to experience that wave of grief. It's been 7 years since Barry died, and just listening to Suzanne again here, I'm experiencing one of those waves right now. First time in several weeks, but it's hitting me just as fresh as when we lost him. And so, folks, I suspect that's true for most of you. That's just kind of the way these things work. So I hope that you will take advantage of the resources that Suzanne and others like her have provided. We've had at least one other episode with Kevin, and I can't think of Kevin's last name right now. This is not Kevin Tumlinson. We talk about him a lot. This is another Kevin. I will link to his episode in the show notes. The book he wrote, I remember, is Two Floors Above Grief. And so we'll share those resources also. And I'm going to reach out to Suzanne about scheduling a follow-up episode. So in any case, I hope that this has been helpful to you, whether you are someone facing grief, as is almost inevitably the case, or if you are supporting someone who is grieving. It will give you some insight into how to do that more effectively. Want to mention once again, remember our sponsors, donking.com/saleswise, donking.com/books. And also, if you would like to support the show, a real easy way to do that is buy me a coffee. That's buymeacoffee.com/Don King. That's one way. I would also encourage you to subscribe at confidencecultivators.com. Subscribe for free. You can upgrade for additional benefits and to support the show. Share this with a friend. You know somebody who could benefit from this. I work with a limited number of people to help them bring their book into publication, so you can always reach out to me about that. But in any case, coming up next week, I'm planning on scheduling an episode with Dan Janal, I believe. I'm almost sure he's been on with us before. He's got a new book coming out, and his is on reframing cancer. Reframing, that's a powerful idea. I'm looking forward to having that conversation with him here on the Alignment Show. So in any case, don't know exactly when we'll have that scheduled. We are continuing right now with trying to get out an episode at least every couple of weeks. Try to do it weekly, but at least every couple of weeks. And because of what else is going on and the life at home, we just can't dependably say what day and what time. But we're going to be there for you and hope that you will make use of these resources to help those that you care about as well. In any case, here at the Alignment Show, we are all about helping you to live your values so you can value your life. We will see you next time on The Alignment Show. That's it for this week's episode of The Alignment Show. What has it inspired you to do in your own life? Whatever it is, take action now and take the first step. It will help you to talk with a friend about what you're thinking. Share confidencecultivators.com to spread the goodness. And remember to live your values and value your life. We will see you next week on The Alignment Show.